Okay, ladies and gents, with this lesson here, let's start off with a question. Do different coaches have different coaching styles? Think about it for a couple of seconds, maybe jot down a couple ideas, and then come back here. In reality, there are major differences between different coaches and their styles. Some people are really fiery and really intense. Some are more calm and nice and easygoing. Some are really, really strategic in the way that they go about doing things. Lots of different styles with coaches. The connection that we're going to see today is the idea of an army general and how they lead and how there are many differences, because the Union is going to go through quite a few, and we're actually going to talk about 4 separate ones today in the early years of the Civil War. So what this lesson is on is the early battles in the Civil War. We're going to see how there are 2 different parts of the war. There's the eastern portion, which is out by the East Coast, and all the fighting that occurs over there. Then there's some fighting over in the west for the Mississippi River. And there's really a complete difference in success rates. And one of the things we're going to really relate that back to is the leadership differences, with Robert E. Lee being a very effective Confederate leader in the East and doing very well against some ineffective Union leaders, and then Ulysses S. Grant out in the West doing very well as a very effective Union leader. So some differences there, and we'll see that as we get through this. Our target for today: I can explain how the results in the East and West differed and who was responsible for those differences. So a quick recap here. Lincoln is pressured into sending troops into battle, even though there's very little training prior to the battle, and that was the Battle of Bull Run. At the Battle of Bull Run, the Confederates won. The Union troops, they panicked, they got out of order, out of organization. They ended up running away, and one of the things that I hope you read about was the fact that when they ran, not only did they run, they actually dropped their weapons, their ammunition, their everything. Basically just throw everything and run as fast as you possibly can. And that was a huge problem, because in doing so, that's really expensive. And they actually helped the Confederates by providing them with more ammunition, more weapons, more everything else. So that was a really, really bad defeat on a lot of different levels, from an embarrassment standpoint and everything. Abraham Lincoln vowed that he wouldn't make the same mistake, so what he decided to do was appoint George McClellan as the leader of the Union Army in the East, and we'll talk about McClellan now for a couple seconds. His background is that he was known as a great organizer. He trained the troops for battle, he got them very well organized as an army as a whole, but the only problem was that in his practicing and all of the work that he did, he was super, super cautious. And if you remember what we talked about yesterday, it was that Lincoln was really, really big in this idea of getting the Union back together as quickly as possible. That was his #1 priority. So if we're not fighting the battle, and if we're just preparing over and over and over again, that's not getting the job done. So Lincoln got a little bit annoyed. There were headlines running in the newspapers, and one of them was "All quiet along the Potomac." The idea that along the Potomac there was no fighting going on, no war, just training and training and training and training. It would be like being a football team and practicing for 6 months and never playing a game. Well, people are going to say, well, what are you practicing for? Why? What's the reason behind this? So it definitely got some people annoyed, including Lincoln. And Lincoln actually was quoted as saying, "If McClellan is not using the army, I should like to borrow it." The idea being, come on, somebody's got to use this thing. We're not paying all this money. We're not training them for no reason. There's a purpose to this. We need to get it taken care of, and we need to start using it. There's General George McClellan. We'll talk about him in a few more days, because he's going to come back and actually run against President Lincoln in the election of 1864. It reminds me of somebody who has a lot of nice cars, and they just park them in the garage, and they take care of them, and they don't use them. I can understand. I mean, I know why they do that, but to me, it seems like, hey, it's a car. You got to use it, and that's how I think a lot of people looked at the army situation. It's an army. It's not nice. War isn't nice, but you're training it for a purpose. Let's go out and let's use it for what the training is for. Now, from the Confederate perspective, there was a strategy change. The first battle was on Southern ground at Bull Run. Robert E. Lee wanted to take the fighting north into the Union, because he thought it could do a couple positive things. #1, it could crush the Union morale. #2, given that it was at the harvest time that we're going to be looking at here with the Battle of Antietam, he figured that if they can come into the north and win a couple battles, they can take a lot of the food and supply their men with the food. Because remember, one of the big things in this war, and we're going to come back and look at the Anaconda Plan in depth later on, but one of the big things in this war is that the people in the South, or the army in the South, they had very limited amounts of supplies. Because remember, in the South, they're not really producing as much food as they are in the North. So if they could take food from the North, that would be a huge thing for the Southern Army. And beyond just the food, it's even just all other supplies. So they're hoping they can win a big battle up here in the north, which will be very helpful. One thing I want to point out to you also, just to make sure this is clear, morale, in case you don't remember this from the Revolutionary War, that's just like the state of mind and the level of positivity that exists in a nation, in an army, in whatever. So they're hoping that if they can win a battle in the north, that'll make them, down in the dumps, feeling, what the heck, maybe this is hopeless, maybe we can't win. That's a big thing in a war, and you have to keep that in mind. It's like being confident in a sporting event or anything else. The more confident you are, the better you're going to perform. Well, in this case, the same holds true for an army. The plans were mapped out for an attack in Maryland, but in one of the weirdest situations ever, and if you don't believe me in this, research it, because I'm telling you it's true. A soldier dropped the battle plans and they fell into the hands of the Union. It was actually in a bag with cigars that all of these battle plans fall out. It's really, really crazy. But the Union actually gets a hold of the Confederate plans for what they're going to do in their attack on the North. And that leads us to Antietam. So McClellan gets these plans. He can certify that they are accurate, and they actually did that. And then he still waits. He says, no, we need to do a little bit more training. And that really frustrated some people, and I'm going to come back to that in a few minutes. Finally, though, the Union did attack the Confederates, knowing where they were going, and they attacked them on September 17th, 1862. And this is the bloodiest day in terms of deaths due to battle in American history, like on American soil. There were 23,000 casualties in this one day. That includes dead and wounded whenever you talk about a casualty number. So if you ever see that when you're researching, that's what they're looking for. It's basically people who are unable to continue fighting in the war because they got a wound that was too bad. If you got scraped on an arm or something minor, they would not count you as a casualty. You're a casualty if you cannot continue fighting. The Battle of Antietam, with this battle, there was no clear winner. And that's one thing that's kind of interesting, because you would think that since McClellan had the battle plans that they would have won, right? Well, it didn't actually work out that way. What ends up happening is this. There are a ton of deaths on both sides. Robert E. Lee heads back to Virginia. So theoretically, you could say it's a Union victory because Robert E. Lee, his plans for the attack in the North was over. But nonetheless, he heads back to Virginia. McClellan lets him go. And this is going to be a sticking point for Abraham Lincoln, because when your army retreats, what do you do if you're on the other side? I should say, if the opponent retreats, what do you do? Well, you need to follow up, and you need to try to attack them when they're on the run, because that's when they're in a really, really vulnerable position, because they're running, they're not really in order, and that's a good time to get a victory. The reason that there were so many deaths here is because at Antietam Creek, there was one bridge to get across it, and if you want to look up another image, you can. But what ends up happening is it's called bottlenecking. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. For instance, and I'm going to try to draw you a bottle right here. Let's pretend this is a bottle, and I know this is not perfect. But let's say you're trying to pour liquid out. You have all of this liquid that goes across this way that you'd want to pour out. So like let's say you were to take scissors and cut it along this line. What would happen is you would pour it and it would come out really, really fast, right? But instead, what happens is all of this has to funnel together. And because of it, it gets jumbled. Envision like if you're on a road and there's a lot of traffic, and let's say there are 4 lanes that come down into 2 lanes. What ends up happening is you get backed up for a really, really long time because everybody has to turn into the same lane, and it gets really slowed up. That's what happened here at Antietam Creek. You had, with the Union, they're all trying to come into this, so you have people coming from different directions. It causes everybody to slow down, and then and what happens is, because of this, the Confederate Army is able to shoot down just at this one bridge over and over again because they know there are going to be all these troops coming there. It causes a lot of death and a lot of casualties overall, and it's a really, really bad situation. Because of this, Abraham Lincoln says, "See you later, McClellan. I'm bringing in a new general," and he brings in Ambrose Burnside. I know you're going to be laughing. Yeah, he has sideburns. Get it? Okay. Anyways, Ambrose Burnside gets his chance against Robert E. Lee at Fredericksburg. It was on December 11th, 1862. And in this battle, the Confederates withdrew to a treeless hill. I want you to close your eyes down and envision a treeless hill. You're on top of it. People at the bottom are going to try to come up and attack you there. Does that seem like the type of hill you want to go up and attack somebody with? Think about the way the weapons are. And there's actually a video in the next folder that talks about new technology. In one section, talks about the new bullets and how accurate they were. Ooh, boy. This is dangerous overall. Burnside attacks uphill 6 times. 6 times. And 6 times the attack is repelled. So he keeps trying to go up the hill and win, but he can't do it. He can't break through. Bad situation overall. There were very high casualties for the Union here, 12,500 versus 5,000 for the Confederates. It's really bad. One of the worst defeats in the war. Because imagine, they're at the top of the hill you're trying to climb up, you know, and you have a gun that's pretty accurate. It's not going to go well. Ambrose Burnside out. Insert Joseph Hooker. Joseph Hooker, he is brought in as a new commander. He raises the morale of the army, trying to, you know, bring some more positivity there. In May 1863, he got his chance against Robert E. Lee, and the Confederates were outnumbered. Excuse me, they were outnumbered 2-1. In other words, there were twice as many Union soldiers at Chancellorsville as there were Confederates. Robert E. Lee makes this crazy move. He divides his soldiers into 3, even though he already has only half as many soldiers. He divides the soldiers into 3, and he attacks Hooker from different angles, and he ends up winning. It's a huge victory, but at a major, major cost. Because something we haven't talked much about is Stonewall Jackson. Stonewall Jackson was a commander in Robert E. Lee's army. The army that they fought with is called the Army of Northern Virginia. But this army needed Stonewall Jackson. He was the second in command to Robert E. Lee. He was super important. And what ends up happening is when he dies, it causes massive problems. And by the way, and there's Stonewall Jackson here, in case you have never seen this picture. But in case, oops, sorry about that. With Stonewall Jackson, this guy right here, what caused his death is actually he was coming back when it was dark out, and he got fired at by Confederate soldiers by accident. So it's a really, really bad break for the Confederacy when he ends up dying. He gets shot in the arm, and I believe he dies of pneumonia a couple days later. So yeah, without Stonewall Jackson, what's going to happen? And that's Robert E. Lee on the left, Stonewall Jackson on the right. That's in the East. So in the East, the Union is getting crushed completely. Robert E. Lee's too much. In the West, they have the Mississippi River campaign going on. Part of the Union plan, which was the Anaconda Plan, I'm going to look at in 1 second, called for taking control of the Mississippi River. Ulysses S. Grant was in charge of it, and what he did is he started capturing different forts along the Mississippi. First, he had some victories at Fort Henry and Fort Donelson, which were big victories. And later on, there would be a big battle coming on. It's Shiloh. Before we get to that, I want to talk about the Great Snake and what it is all about. Now, this image, in my opinion, is not as accurate as I would like, because what the Great Snake was this. They would have boats, and let's have boats. You guys like my sailboats? There we go. All across the ocean, basically blocking all the Confederate ports and all the Confederate travel. Now, there are these things that you can watch on the video, too, that are called ironclad ships, and you'll see that. The Confederacy had one, too. But nonetheless, it basically is going to block ships from being able to transport things from America to Europe and vice versa, which is going to limit supplies. That's the one part of this whole idea of the Great Snake or the Anaconda Plan. Like an anaconda, to kill its prey, it surrounds it and it squeezes it to death. It squeezes the air out of it. That's basically what the Union's trying to do. So they're saying, look, we're not going to let you get any supplies. If you want to look at this from a realistic perspective here, there's a natural border, where I'm drawing this line right now, that separates the Union and the Confederacy, because when you have your northern, which is what we're really looking at here, your northern states here, they're going to create a border, so you're not going to actually be able to trade. Like, for instance, Pennsylvania's not going to trade down south, right? You don't have to worry about that. Now, you do need to worry about the west, the south, and potentially the eastern coast. So it's easy on the coasts because you can just put boats there. In the west, what they're going to end up doing here is we first start around Texas and such, and we try to create a border there. But that ends up not being the big plan. The big plan is to block the Mississippi River, because if you're the Union and you can control the Mississippi River all the way up to the Union, there's nowhere that supplies can come in, and that's really what the goal becomes. So we're going to see there are a series of battles fought over these strategic positions along the Mississippi, in order to keep control of this and to create this total, I don't know, not coming up with the word, but just completely surrounding the South so that we can blockade all of their supplies. Now, Shiloh was a huge battle involved in this campaign on April 6, 1862. It was a sneak attack in which the Confederates were able to win the first day because they caught Ulysses S. Grant, who was the leader here in the West. They caught him by surprise. Now, Grant is encouraged by the other officers to retreat, and Grant responds back, "Retreat? No, I propose to attack at daylight and whip them." a lot of courage there. Maybe sounds like overconfidence, kind of like Ambrose Burnside, 6 times uphill. No, we're not going to give up. We're going to keep going. Well, that was kind of reckless. Grant, he obviously is pretty effective. He got some more reinforcements, and the Union was able to win. And this battle ended up being 20,000 killed or wounded, which is another bad battle. And that's the reality. There are a lot of these battles where there are so many casualties. It's crazy. When you compare this to like the Revolutionary War, you look at 2 battles here, and they've already surpassed the total amount of death in the Revolutionary War. Around the same time, New Orleans was won by the Union, so that means the Mississippi River, the Confederacy can't come up and down it using the bottom portion, which in the mouth of it, which is at the Gulf of Mexico. So that was a big victory. Now, the reality is, though, that we have a situation where the Union is doing well in one portion, but terrible in the other portion. So the West, the Union's doing well. They've almost sealed up the Mississippi. They're not quite there yet, though. But in the East, they're getting crushed. So what needs to happen? Well, we'll see what's going to happen here later on. And the life of a soldier is so rough. That's something we're going to look at later on too, and see how bad it really was for them on the front lines and going through this. But yeah, a really rough situation overall for them. The longer the war drags on, though, the less popular it's going to become, and eventually Lincoln's going to find a way to increase support for the war, and that's what we're going to look at tomorrow. Okay, so keep posted on that. Make sure you finish all the items in both folders, and yeah, good luck with that. Okay, if you have any questions that are of dire concern, you can email me. But we'll get caught up here through the next few days, and then on Monday we'll be back with all the new stuff that's going on. Okay? Good luck, have a good day, and make sure you guys finish everything in the folder.